Hey all, this is Mark and Omni Embedded, and welcome to ProDev and DDC Tool Introductions, Chapters D and E. We originally had these as two separate chapters, but they're combined into one video. First is the ProDev tool. We've already looked at project creation in Chapter A, and so we're going to watch the Blinky demo to see the ProDev tool in use. You can create your own Blinky project by following along with the Blinky demo. Most of the use of ProDev is in the first half of the demo. So let's pause this video and watch Blinky and then resume. You can find the Blinky demo from a VTrek website and select videos and then go to the demos section. So the takeaways from this demo is that creating new projects is pretty straightforward. Utilizing the tool for configuration, file creation, and adding snippets speeds up the coding process. And everything that was done through the ProDev tool can also be done manually. So there's no real dependency on the tool to develop projects. It's a helper. Now, custom file creation and snippets can be added to extend ProDev and support your custom business logic. And here's how we do that. So I'm in the Blinky project right now, and I'm going to go to Source, VTrek Source Lib, and VPD. And you're going to find a docx file in here. There's also an aid config file, and I'm going to open that right now. And if you go into your business logic folder, you're also going to find a VPD file with the same sub folders and an aid config file. And I'm going to open that as well. And then we'll look at the docx. So this is a document that explains how the aid markers and snippets and file templates work and what you need to do to set them up. And so the VPD folder is VTrek ProDev. It's a folder that contains the files associated with ProDev's ability to do snippets and file templates, and then also how to mark files so that the tool can interact with them. These are source code files. And so this section goes through the code markers, and if you look through code files in the VTrek library, you're going to find these used throughout. And there's examples on how to use them and how they would look in your source file if you want enums and structures to become part of a configuration file and utilized by the tool. So structures and enums and enum classes that don't have markers are essentially ignored by the tool, so they're not loaded and used for drop downs and selections. And then the aid tool is where we get into the aid configuration file. That's the ACF file that we currently have open. And then also the forms and ability to create snippet files and the form control for the snippet files, template files. And so each one of these sections explains what you're going to see in the list of available files. And so you can align this or compare this to what you see in files that have already been created. And it should give you a good idea as to how this works. So the ACF file that comes with VTrek is already filled out. The one that's in the business logic folder in the VPD folder is ready to be filled out. So it's got the sections, but it's blank. And you can use this one to see how to fill it out essentially. So the list of building blocks, you can see that those are listed here. This is for the library, and these should be familiar. They're the ones you see in the folder structure when you open a project. If you wanted to extend that and add some in your business logic area, you can add it to this list, and then what the tool does is concatenates the list from both files so that they become a single list within the tool. Same thing with data types. If you want to add to that you can do it in this file. And the required component list, if you're going to create a new project, these components have to be in the new project. They're required. And so that's that list. And if you add any more, you can always add it to this file. This is the dependencies list. And so when you're in the section of the tool and you're selecting different software components, if there are any dependencies or chains, this is where you would list those so that the tool can pick them up and interact with the user, and make sure that if you select a software component that has dependencies, that the dependencies will all automatically get selected as well. So these have a component, dependency, chained, select message, and deselect message. So the select message is if the user selects a component, this message is going to be presented if it has anything in it. And the same thing with deselect. Dependencies are individual software components that are needed by, like in this case, the DDC service, DDC 140 service, needs to see COM service enabled, MPA, and MTP. Those all have to be selected as well, and so those are dependencies. Chains, on the other hand, as explained up here, this is a list of folders that are subordinate to the component folder. A software component that has subfolders within it. This tells the tool that it needs to include what's in the subfolders. If you have subfolders and there's nothing in it that the tool needs to interact with, then you would leave this blank. Or if you have no subfolders at all in the area where your software component is stored. We also have a component filter list. And so these are components that are present but filtered, not presented in the tool. The ones that you see here are ones that aren't yet ready for prime time. They're under development, they're in the library, but they're not eligible yet for prime time, and so they're being blocked. We're looking at a version of VTrek that's not yet released, and so that's the reason that you'll see these. Once VTrek is fully released, of course, this should be blank. And then third-party, enums and structs. So if you're adding third-party libraries, source code from third-party products in here, and of course they're not going to have our markers, then this gives you the ability to call out the enums and structures that are in the third-party code that you want the tool to present, either drop-downs or selectable items. Those can be listed in this section. So that's what the ACF file is all about. Now if we run into snippets, and you'll see in the Word document how snippets work, and there's usually two files, although there doesn't have to be, but we'll open these and take a look. So the DCF file is your file that creates, the tool create a form for a given snippet. These are what shows up in the help drop-down, your cursor help. Then we've got a form start and a form end, and then within the form we have objects, form objects. And this is for adding a mode service listener, and so in this case we have two standard items in the form that always show up, so those don't have to be called out here. And then whatever you want to add to it. In this case, it's a text box so that you can enter a callback function to be used. And this is what gets put in the text box when it gets presented. It can be blank. This tells the tool how wide you want the text box. And then this creates a substitution variable so that whatever the user types in that, this is the reference to that field. And then we've got, callback priority and default value that's stuffed in there, and the user is going to enter whatever they want and then hit go. And at that point, we're going to execute, in this case, this file, CSD. We'll go take a look at that. So this is essentially, it's the source file, or it's the snippet that's going to get put into source code. And in some cases, it's going to reference, it's going to have start and end markers in it, and it's going to reference those variables that we talked about that was in the form. So in this case, in the header file, it's going to add this include. And the way that it knows what file is one of those two fields that's always in the form. One of those is a drop-down list of software components, and so you're selecting the component that you want this snippet to go into. Now we've got snippet starts and snippet ends, and each one of these we tell the tool the location and the snippet. And the location, the way that that's defined, and you'll find this in the Word document, these files are broken into specific sections by markers, tool markers. And then there's a list of ways that you specify which one of those regions you want to go in. One of them is a private method prototype, and we're saying that we want to go to the bottom of that. So in the header file, you're always going to see a section that's the private method prototypes, a region. And this snippet is going to be put in the bottom of it. Notice it's referencing whatever the user put in this field. And if they put nothing in it, then it's nothing when it goes into the file. And then the next snippet is going to go into the constructor. So this is in the CPP file, and it's going to go to the bottom of it. And this is the snippet that's being put in. So you can see that we're creating a new mode service delegate. The component name is going to be the drop-down field that's always in the form that you select the software component. And so that becomes a component name. And then, of course, the function name and priority were entered by the user. And then lastly, there's one last snippet that gets put in, and this is CPP file at the bottom. And here's the snippet, and it is, it's essentially the mode service callback method. All right, it's laying out a switch case in here so that you can enter your code. So that's how snippets are created, and you can do a lot with these. You can make them as complicated as you want. The whole idea, though, is to save time. Rather than copying and pasting code from somewhere and then modifying it, this gives you a set of snippets, code insertions, that are going to be the same every time. And so you get consistency in your source, and you really don't have to think a lot about how it needs to be implemented. It just is thrown in place and you start coding. All right. The next thing to talk about then are the code file templates, and these are much the same. There's going to be a file that has the form information in it, and then another one that's the actual template. So in this case, the bottom one is the form, and here's the name and description that shows up as a hot tip. In this particular case, there's a text box, and it wants the base name for, this one happens to be creating a user-defined type file. All right, and there's a substitute for this field called component name. And then there's an execution area, and we assign a value to a variable because we want this suffix to be used. That's part of the patterns in VTrek, and then we're going to call this file. And so this file is the UDT. So it has the copyright notice. Company comes from the ACF file, if you'll recall, and we'll go back and open that. This happens to be the VTrek ACF file, but the one in your product logic, you can put your own company name in, and then that's what gets put in here. And then, of course, the system date. Include guard symbol, which is automatically generated based on the name of the component. Include section. This one already has the markers, of course, that the VPD tool needs, and is laid out as a user-defined type with all of the required methods already in it and just waiting to be filled in. So this gives you a nice file pattern to use so that every UDT is going to look pretty much the same except for the variables that are inside of it. Basically, if you create one of these files in source code, then you can copy and paste it into a CFT file and then just go through and replace data that's already in the file with the file markers, or with the substitution macros, the variable names, if you will, that are needed to be filled in by the tool. Some of these are standard, they're built in. These three are, the file name, company, and date are all built in. And document, the Word document actually lists those. Like here's the various locations, they're listed. Here's a list of the controls that you can use and here's the list of the predefined substitution symbols. So component name, file path, file base, file name, company, date, group being SVC for services, CNT for controls, etc. The include guard is auto-generated and is configurable. Component is also available. And if you're creating a file that is going to be a configurable component, there's going to be a checkbox that you check. And then this is going to be true. So you can use that in your snippet code or template file code to make decisions about what should go in the file. There's also an if statement available, and this shows an example of that. So this is an execution that's going to have an optional CPP file. And so if need CPP, then we're going to set a suffix and then run this CPP file, configuration file. If it's configurable, then we're going to add a configuration file and so forth. So you can put these anywhere. We're just using symbols that have either been created in the form or are the standard symbols. And you can do whatever you want within those if statements. All right, so that pretty much covers the aid aspect, markers and aids aspect of the tool. And when you first start to create these, really the best thing to do is use this document and then look at the ones that have already been created for VTREC as references. And you should be fine in terms of creating new ones. Okay, next we're going to look at the DDC tool, and we're going to use the PID and motor demo to watch the DDC in action. So the items to watch for in this upcoming demo, we have a section that shows the data items being used, and that's at 1527. There's a section where the use of the DDC tool starts, that's at 1830. We're creating control and chart views at 1924. And then we're looking at playback capability in the DDC at 2614. The rest of this demo is interesting. You're welcome to watch the entire demo, but for this review, those are the sections that are germane. So we can pause this video and then resume after we've watched it. So in order to watch the video, if you go to the VTREC homepage and then go to Videos and Tutorials, and then under Demos, if we look at that playlist, you'll see the DC motor PID demo, and this is the one to watch. Okay, welcome back. And what were the takeaways from this PID demo? One is the ease of creating, viewing, saving, and recalling views. We had charts and controls, and it was easy to create them. You could save them as a group in a file, and then recall them at any time. The playback capability is powerful, especially in terms of desktop testing or lab testing. And you can also roll your own app using the DLL. That's the DDC API DLL that's located in this location. And use pretty much any .NET compatible language and create tests, applications, etc. using the same DLL that the DDC tool uses. Okay, that completes chapters D and E combined into one video. And the next one on the list is chapter F, which is real-time interface and data center. And thanks for watching.